My stepdaughter pawned my late father's watch and used the money for a day out, then told me to get over it. He's dead anyway, she said. When I confronted her, my wife laughed and said, "You're not even her real dad. Know your place." I stayed silent. That was 3 months ago. This morning, they were both crying, calling me dad and desperately begging for forgiveness. My wife and I love each other a lot. We're solid in many ways, but there's one thing we heavily disagree on, and that's how to raise my 16-year-old stepdaughter, Susie. My wife firmly believes Susie's old enough to do literally whatever she wants. No consequences, no restrictions, nothing. And the worst part is that if I ever disagree with her, I get reminded how I'm just the stepdad who should know his place. The thing is, I've been in her life since she was 5, and I've tried everything to be a great stepdad. I've paid for ballet lessons, drove Susie to every competition she had, and I still cook breakfast for her every day, but she just hates me for seemingly no reason. For example, just a few months ago, I caught her selling disposable vapes to 12-year-olds, given that my own 14-year-old nephew was recently hospitalized because of vaping, something she knew. I was enraged, but I managed to collect myself to calmly talk to her, but she refused to even speak to me. "You can't tell me what to do. Only mom can. I'm not talking about it." She then rolled her eyes dismissively. That's when my wife joined in, telling me, "You're not her dad. Don't act like it." They backed one another up and my wife took her upstairs to talk. I don't know what was said. All I know is Susie is yet to admit she was wrong. And then my relationship with Susie, which was already rocky, plummeted to rock bottom a few weeks ago. She came to me asking for a new MacBook after she dropped it and scuffed the corner. It wasn't broken. It worked perfectly. And so I told her no. I didn't have that kind of money right now. I'd spent a lot in the past year helping with my dad's funeral costs. I told her so and she snapped at me. "Why did you do that? He's dead anyway. That money should be spent on me and mom." I was shell-shocked. Frozen even. My throat clamped shut. "Got you there, didn't I?" She mocked my silence. Before I even knew what was happening, my wife ran downstairs. She took Susie's side without even asking what the original conflict was about. And before I knew it, I was getting called dumb and a terrible stepdad for prioritizing some dead guy over the light of my life. I couldn't even speak. I just stayed silent, waiting for them to stop. But then Susie outright insulted my dad, asking me if I got my uselessness from him. That's when I exploded. I yelled at them to shut up so loud my voice broke. They went silent, and I said that Susie wasn't getting a cent, and until she apologized, I'd be cutting off her allowance. This was the first time I ever raised my voice like that. I went to bed that night feeling guilty and borderline mad at myself for how I handled the situation. And for the next few days, the house was silent, cold, thick with tension until something broke the silence. It happened the day I went to visit my father's grave. Every Sunday, I went there to talk to him. And I always wore his old watch. It was the watch he gave to me. 3 generations old and priceless. I'd even bring the original box with me, which I'd sit down by his headstone before talking to him. I know it's silly, but the watch being there made me feel like he was really listening. I went to my drawer to take it out, but the watch wasn't there. I panicked. I started checking every drawer and rushed downstairs to ask my wife if she'd seen it, but instead of a response, I was met with silence. Radio silence. I asked her again if she knew where the watch was, and this time she tried to divert by asking what I wanted for breakfast. She even rushed into the kitchen and started preparing something, but I stopped her. I asked her again very sternly, "Where is the watch?" I maintained eye contact the whole time and she broke. She started crying, begging me not to be mad. I chuckled nervously. Why would I be mad? It's not like my watch is gone or anything. Well, that's when she spilled. Turns out Susie was mad at me for not buying her the MacBook, and she deemed that to be the fault of my deceased dad. In her mind, I needed to let go of my connection with him. And once I did, I'd be more than happy to spend my money on things that actually mattered. So she took my watch, pawned it for a couple hundred, and right at this very moment was out treating herself and her girlfriends to a spa. My world stopped when my wife told me. I felt so many emotions at once. Rage, sadness, betrayal, everything. But I didn't show any of it. In fact, I stood there smiling because while my wife was looking at me concerned, telling me we can get the watch back, my mind was on one thing and one thing only. If Susie wanted to act like a spoiled, entitled brat, then I would treat her like one. Because this was no longer just about the watch. This was about being the man my dad raised me to be. I grabbed my keys. Karen started panicking, asking where I was going. I didn't answer. I drove straight to the pawn shop in town. There's only one. And I asked about the watch. The owner, James, knew me from my regular visits to look at fishing gear. "Yeah, someone brought in an old Omega yesterday," he said. "Young girl, maybe 16 or so." My heart sank when he told me he'd already sold it to a collector who'd been looking for that exact model. I explained the situation, that it was a family heirloom stolen from me by my stepdaughter. James seemed genuinely sorry and offered to call the buyer to see if they'd return it. I spent the next hour pacing around the shop while James made calls. Finally, he came back with some news: the buyer would return it, but wanted triple what he'd paid. It was nearly $1,200, money we didn't have just lying around. I immediately withdrew it from my emergency savings and paid James to arrange the exchange. When I got home, Karen and Susie were acting like nothing had happened. They were watching TV and eating ice cream. Karen looked surprised to see me. Did you calm down? She asked casually. I didn't answer directly. I found out where the watch went. I'm getting it back tomorrow. Susie rolled her eyes. It's just a stupid watch. I looked at her for a long moment. That watch survived World War II on my grandfather's wrist. My father wore it every day of his adult life. It's the only thing I have left of him. Whatever, Susie muttered. Karen jumped in. I think you're overreacting. It's not like she sold your kidney. It's just an object. I realized then that they would never understand. They didn't want to understand. I'd spent 11 years trying to be a father to someone who saw me as nothing more than a wallet and a punching bag, and my wife had enabled it every step of the way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times I'd let things slide for the sake of peace. The time Susie accidentally deleted a work presentation I'd spent weeks on. The time she told her school I'd been drinking when I picked her up, completely untrue, which led to an embarrassing conversation with her principal. The time she purposely knocked over my dad's urn, but claimed it was the cat. In the morning, I called in sick to work and went back to the pawn shop. James had the watch waiting for me. I put it on immediately, feeling the familiar weight on my wrist. It was like having a small piece of my dad back. Family trouble? James asked sympathetically. Something like that, I replied. When I got home, I found Karen going through my drawers. She jumped when I entered the room. What are you doing? I asked. Looking for the receipt, she admitted. I wanted to see how much money you wasted on that watch. I showed her my wrist. It wasn't a waste, and I'm not sure why you're putting wasted in air quotes. It was stolen from me, and I got it back. Karen started the usual argument about how I cared more about things than people. How I was being insensitive to Susan's feelings, how I needed to try harder to connect with her. I'd heard it all before. But this time, I didn't just take it. I didn't apologize or promise to do better. Instead, I asked her a question that had been building for years. Karen, do you actually want me to be Susan's father or just her ATM? She looked shocked. What are you talking about? Of course, I want you to be her father. No, I said calmly. You want me to provide for her? You want me to drive her places and pay for things? But the moment I try to parent her to teach her right from wrong or give her consequences for bad behavior, I'm suddenly just the stepdad who needs to know his place. Karen didn't have a response to this. She just stared at me. I've been thinking a lot. I continued. If Susie wants to act like an entitled brat who has no respect for other people's property or feelings, then maybe it's time I show her what real consequences look like. What's that supposed to mean? Karen demanded. I smiled. It means things are going to change around here starting now. That evening, I called a family meeting. Both Karen and Susie looked annoyed, but showed up at the dining room table. I laid out 3 new house rules. First, Susan's allowance was suspended indefinitely. If she wanted money, she could earn it by doing chores or getting a part-time job like other teenagers. Second, both Karen and Susie would start contributing to household chores. I was no longer going to work all day, then come home to cook and clean while they watched TV. Third, we would all be attending family therapy. This wasn't negotiable. Karen immediately started protesting, saying I had no right to make these decisions unilaterally. Susie just laughed and said, yeah, good luck with that. I calmly took out my phone and pulled up my banking app. I showed them that I had removed Karen from our joint account and transferred half of our savings to a separate account in just my name. This is what financial abuse looks like, Karen shouted. No, I corrected her. This is what boundaries look like. I'm still paying the mortgage, utilities, and groceries. I'm still providing for Susan's needs, but I'm no longer funding disrespect. Susie stormed off to her room. Karen followed soon after, threatening divorce. I sat alone at the table, wondering if I'd just blown up my marriage. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself and maybe even being the father figure Susie actually needed, not just the one she wanted. The next morning, I found Karen and Susie whispering in the kitchen. They went silent when I walked in. I made my own breakfast and coffee, then left for work without a word. As I drove away, I kept glancing at my dad's watch on my wrist, wondering what he would think of all this. He'd always taught me that respect was earned, not given, and that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing were the same. I decided that it was time to show Susie and Karen what it meant to have real consequences for their actions. I've been letting them walk all over me for years, and look where that got me. My dad would have never put up with this kind of disrespect. He was always firm, but fair, and I needed to channel some of that energy now. When I got home from work that evening, the house was eerily quiet. Usually, Karen would be watching her shows at full volume while Susie blasted music from her room. I found a note on the fridge saying they'd gone shopping and would be back later. No other details. I checked our bank accounts and sure enough, Karen had already spent $200 at the mall. She still had her own credit card, which I couldn't control, but at least she wasn't draining our shared resources anymore. I used the quiet time to make some calls. First, I contacted a family therapist recommended by a colleague and scheduled our first session for the following week. Then, I called my brother David to update him on the situation. It's about damn time, David said when I told him about the new rules. Karen and Susie have been treating you like a doormat for years. Yeah, well, I admitted, I was so focused on trying to be the perfect stepdad that I forgot to stand up for myself. David offered to let me stay with him if things got worse, which I appreciated, but hoped wouldn't be necessary. After hanging up, I started making dinner. Just enough for myself this time. Karen and Susie came home around 8 p.m. carrying several shopping bags. They looked surprised to see me sitting at the table eating alone. "Where's our dinner?" Karen asked like it was the most natural question in the world. "I made enough for myself," I replied calmly. "There are ingredients in the fridge if you're hungry." Susie rolled her eyes and mumbled something about ordering pizza. Karen glared at me, but didn't say anything else. They retreated to Susie's room with their shopping bags, and I heard them laughing about something a few minutes later. The next morning, I woke up early as usual and made coffee. Out of habit, I almost started making Susie's breakfast before catching myself. Part of me felt guilty. I'd made her breakfast every day for 11 years. But another part of me knew this was necessary. She was 16, perfectly capable of pouring her own cereal. When Susie finally emerged from her room, she looked at the empty counter in confusion. "Where's my breakfast?" she asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "You can make your own breakfast today," I replied, sipping my coffee. "The cereal is in the same cabinet it's been in for the past decade." She stared at me like I'd suggested she solve a complex math equation. "But you always make my breakfast," she said, almost whining. "Things change," I responded. "One of growing up is learning to do things for yourself." She huffed dramatically and grabbed a Pop-Tart from the pantry, then slouched back to her room without another word. Karen came out shortly after, giving me a cold look as she made her own coffee. "So, this is how it's going to be?" she asked. "You're going to punish us for the watch incident by not making breakfast?" "I'm not punishing anyone," I explained. "I'm just no longer doing everything for everyone else while getting nothing but disrespect in return." Karen scoffed. "You're being childish." "No," I countered. "I'm being an adult with boundaries. There's a difference." The rest of the weekend continued in much the same way. I did my own laundry, but not theirs. I cooked for myself, but not them. I cleaned up my own messes, but left theirs alone. By Sunday evening, the house was showing the effects of my new approach. Their dirty dishes were piling up and clothes were scattered around their rooms. Sunday night, I reminded them about the therapy appointment I'd scheduled for Tuesday evening. "I'm not going to that," Susie declared immediately. "Me neither," Karen added. "You can't force us to go to therapy," I nodded. "You're right. I can't force you. But if you want me to continue covering your cell phone bill, Susie, or the car insurance, Karen, then family therapy is non-negotiable." They both looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I guess they weren't used to me standing my ground. "That's blackmail," Karen sputtered. "No, it's a condition," I corrected her. "Adults make agreements all the time. This is mine. Participation in family therapy in exchange for continued financial support beyond the basics." Monday morning, I left for work as usual, half expecting to come home to find my belongings on the front lawn. Instead, I returned to find Karen in a slightly better mood. She actually spoke to me about her day, though there was still tension in her voice. Susie remained in her room most of the evening, only emerging to grab food before disappearing again. Tuesday was the day of our first therapy session. I came home from work early to make sure we'd all get there on time. To my surprise, both Karen and Susie were ready, though neither looked happy about it. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, had a calm, non-nonsense demeanor that I appreciated immediately. She started by explaining that she wasn't there to take sides, but to help us communicate better as a family. "So, what brings you here today?" she asked. After we'd introduced ourselves, I started explaining the situation, the years of disrespect, the incident with my father's watch, and my recent decision to establish boundaries. Karen interrupted several times to give her version, painting me as controlling and unreasonable. Susie mostly stared at her phone, occasionally glancing up to nod at something Karen said. Dr. Martinez listened carefully, then asked each of us to describe what we wanted from our family relationships. I talked about mutual respect and shared responsibilities. Karen mentioned feeling unsupported and misunderstood. Susie, when finally prompted to speak, just shrugged and said, "I don't know." For him to stop being so strict about everything. By the end of the session, we hadn't resolved anything major, but Dr. Martinez had given us some communication exercises to practice at home. She also suggested that Susie and I spend some one-on-one time together doing something we both enjoyed. On the drive home, Karen seemed thoughtful. "I don't think the therapist understood our situation," she finally said. "What didn't she understand?" I asked. "She kept acting like we're all equally responsible for our problems," Karen replied. "But you're the one who changed everything by cutting off the money." I took a deep breath. "I didn't cut off the money, I just stopped letting you both use it without any accountability." The conversation ended there, but I noticed Karen was less hostile that evening. Small progress, I suppose. The next day, I came home to find a surprise. Susie had made dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just spaghetti with jar sauce, but it was the first time she'd ever cooked for the family. "What's the occasion?" I asked cautiously. Susie shrugged. "The therapist said I should try doing something nice for you, so I made dinner. Don't make a big deal about it." We ate together as a family for the first time in weeks. The conversation was stilted and awkward, but it was something. After dinner, Karen actually helped clear the table without being asked. Later that night, I found Susie sitting alone in the living room, scrolling through her phone as usual. Remembering Dr. Martinez's suggestion about spending time together, I asked if she wanted to watch a movie. "Whatever," she said, which I took as a yes. I put on an action film we both enjoyed in the past and we sat in silence for a while. About halfway through, Susie spoke up. Is your dad's watch really that important? She asked, not looking at me. Yes, I answered simply. It's not just about the watch itself. It's what it represents. Family history, memories of my dad, the values he taught me. She nodded slightly, but didn't say anything else. Still, it felt like a tiny breakthrough. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Small improvements interspersed with old behaviors. Susie made her own breakfast without complaining. Karen started doing more around the house, but there were still moments of tension and resistance, especially when it came to Susie's allowance. How am I supposed to go out with my friends with no money? She demanded one evening. You could get a part-time job, I suggested. That's what I did when I was your age. She rolled her eyes. That's so lame. None of my friends have to work. None of your friends pawn their stepfather's family heirloom either, I pointed out. That shut her up quickly. Karen, who'd been listening nearby, actually didn't jump in to defend Susie this time, which felt like progress. Our second therapy session went a bit smoother than the first. Dr. Martinez had us practice active listening, repeating back what the other person said before responding. It was harder than it sounded, especially when emotions ran high. Susie struggled the most, often interrupting with, "That's not what happened," when Karen or I tried to explain our perspectives. After the session, Dr. Martinez asked to speak with me privately for a few minutes. Karen looked suspicious, but took Susie to wait in the car. You're doing a good job setting boundaries, Dr. Martinez told me once they'd left. But remember that change takes time. Susie has had 16 years of learning that she can get away with disrespectful behavior. It won't change overnight. I nodded, appreciating her encouragement. What about Karen? She still undermines me constantly. Your wife is caught between her role as Susie's mother and her role as your partner, Dr. Martinez explained. She needs time to find a new balance. Keep communicating with her, but also make time for just the two of you. Remember why you became a couple in the first place? I took her advice to heart and asked Karen on a date night that weekend. To my surprise, she agreed. We went to a simple dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date 12 years ago. Things were tense at first, but after a glass of wine, Karen started to relax. I know things have been difficult lately, she said, toying with her napkin. But I feel like you're trying to control everything. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I'm not trying to control everything. I'm just trying to establish some balance. For years, I've been doing whatever you and Susie wanted regardless of how it affected me. That's not healthy for any of us. Karen seemed to consider this. I guess I got used to you always going along with whatever we wanted, and I got used to doing it, I admitted, but that doesn't mean it was right. We didn't solve all our problems that night, but it felt like we'd at least started an honest conversation. When we got home, Susie was waiting up, looking surprisingly anxious. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, she said quickly. I found something for you. She handed me a small box. Inside was a keychain with a fishing lure, a nod to the fishing trips I used to take her on when she was younger. I remembered you lost your old one, she mumbled. It's not a big deal or anything. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot coming from Susie. Thank you, I said sincerely. I love it. The next morning, I put the new keychain on my keys right away. Susie noticed and gave a small smile before quickly resuming her typical teenage expression of boredom.